Later Roman Empire. The Roman Empire reached its greatest territorial extent during the 2nd century AD. The following 2 centuries witnessed the slow decline of Roman control over its outlying territories. Economic issues, including inflation and external pressure on the frontiers, combined to create the crisis of the 3rd century, with emperors coming to the throne only to be rapidly replaced by new usurpers. Military expenses increased steadily during the 3rd century, mainly in response to the war with the Sasanian Empire, which revived in the middle of the 3rd century. The army doubled in size, and cavalry and smaller units replaced the Roman legion as the main tactical unit. The need for revenue led to increased taxes and a decline in numbers of the curio, or landowning, class, and decreasing numbers of them willing to shoulder the burdens of holding office in their native towns. More bureaucrats were needed in the central administration to deal with the needs of the army, which led to complaints from civilians that there were more tax collectors in the empire than taxpayers. The Emperor Diocletian, ruled 284 to 305, split the empire into separately administered eastern and western halves in 286. The empire was not considered divided by its inhabitants or rulers, as legal and administrative promulgations in one division were considered valid in the other. In 330, after a period of civil war, Constantine the Great, ruled 306 to 337, refounded the city of Byzantium as the newly renamed eastern capital, Constantinople. Diocletian's reforms strengthened the governmental bureaucracy, reformed taxation, and strengthened the army, which bought the empire time but did not resolve the problems it was facing: excessive taxation, a declining birth rate, and pressures on its frontiers, among others. Civil war between rival emperors became common in the middle of the 4th century, diverting soldiers from the empire's frontier forces and allowing invaders to encroach. For much of the 4th century, Roman society stabilized in a new form that differed from the earlier classical period, with a widening gulf between the rich and poor and a decline in the vitality of the smaller towns. Another change was the Christianization or conversion of the empire to Christianity, a gradual process that lasted from the 2nd to the 5th centuries.
In 376, the Goths, fleeing from the Huns, received permission from Emperor Valens to settle in the Roman province of Thracia in the Balkans. The settlement did not go smoothly, and the Goths began to raid and plunder when Roman officials mishandled the situation. Valens, attempting to put down the disorder, was killed fighting the Goths at the Battle of Adrianople on 9 August 378. In addition to the threat from such tribal confederacies in the north, internal divisions within the empire, especially within the Christian Church, caused problems. In 400, the Visigoths invaded the Western Roman Empire and, although briefly forced back from Italy, in 410 sacked the city of Rome. In 406, the Alans, Vandals, and Suevi crossed into Gaul. Over the next 3 years, they spread across Gaul and in 409 crossed the Pyrenees Mountains into modern-day Spain. The migration period began when various peoples, initially largely Germanic peoples, moved across Europe. The Franks, the Alemanni, and the Burgundians all ended up in northern Gaul, while the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes settled in Britain, and the Vandals went on to cross the Strait of Gibraltar, after which they conquered the province of Africa. In the 430s, the Huns began invading the empire. Their king, Attila, led invasions into the Balkans in 442 and 447, Gaul in 451, and Italy in 452. The Hunnic threat remained until Attila's death in 453, when the Hunnic confederation he led fell apart. These invasions by the tribes completely changed the political and demographic nature of what had been the Western Roman Empire. By the end of the 5th century, the western section of the empire was divided into smaller political units ruled by the tribes that had invaded in the early part of the century. The deposition of the last emperor of the West, Romulus Augustulus, in 476, has traditionally marked the end of the Western Roman Empire. By 493, the Italian peninsula was conquered by the Ostrogoths. The Eastern Roman Empire, often referred to as the Byzantine Empire after the fall of its Western counterpart, had little ability to assert control over the lost Western territories. The Byzantine emperors maintained a claim over the territory, but while none of the new kings in the West dared to elevate himself to the position of Emperor of the West, Byzantine control of most of the Western Empire could not be sustained. The reconquest of the Mediterranean periphery and the Italian peninsula, the Gothic War in the reign of Justinian, was the sole and temporary exception.
Early Middle Ages. The political structure of Western Europe changed with the end of the United Roman Empire. Although the movements of peoples during this period are usually described as invasions, they were not just military expeditions, but migrations of entire peoples into the empire. Such movements were aided by the refusal of the Western Roman elites to support the army or pay the taxes that would have allowed the military to suppress the migration. The emperors of the 5th century were often controlled by military strongmen such as Stilicho, Aetius, Aspar, Ricimer, or Gundobad, who were partly or fully of non-Roman background. When the line of Western emperors ceased, many of the kings who replaced them were from the same background. Intermarriage between the new kings and the Roman elites was common. This led to a fusion of Roman culture with the customs of the invading tribes, including the popular assemblies that allowed free male tribal members more say in political matters than was common in the Roman state. Material artifacts left by the Romans and the invaders are often similar, and tribal items were often modeled on Roman objects. Much of the scholarly and written culture of the New Kingdoms was also based on Roman intellectual traditions. An important difference was the new polity's gradual loss of tax revenue. Many new political entities no longer supported their armies through taxes. Instead, they relied on granting them land or rents. This meant there was less need for large tax revenues, so the taxation systems decayed. Warfare was common between and within the kingdoms. Slavery declined as the supply weakened, and society became more rural. Between the 5th and 8th centuries, new peoples and individuals filled the political void left by the centralized Roman government. The Ostrogoths, a Gothic tribe, settled in Roman Italy in the late 5th century under Theodoric the Great, d. 526, and set up a kingdom marked by its cooperation between the Italians and the Ostrogoths, at least until the last years of Theodoric's reign. The Burgundians settled in Gaul, and after an earlier realm was destroyed by the Huns in 436, formed a new kingdom in the 440s. Between today's Geneva and Lyon, it grew to become the realm of Burgundy in the late 5th and early 6th centuries. Elsewhere in Gaul, the Franks and Celtic Britons set up small polities. Francia was centered in northern Gaul, and the first king of whom much is known is Childeric I, d. 481. His grave was discovered in 1653 and is remarkable for its grave goods, which included weapons and a large quantity of gold. Under Childeric's son, Clovis I, ruled 509 to 511, the founder of the Merovingian dynasty, the Frankish kingdom expanded and converted to Christianity. The Britons, related to the natives of Britannia, modern-day Great Britain, settled in what is now Brittany, F. Other monarchies were established by the Visigothic kingdom in the Iberian Peninsula, the Suebi in northwestern Iberia, and the Vandal kingdom in North Africa. In the 6th century, the Lombards settled in northern Italy, replacing the Ostrogothic kingdom with a grouping of duchies that occasionally selected a king to rule over them all. By the late 6th century, this arrangement had been replaced by a permanent monarchy, the Kingdom of the Lombards.
Byzantine survival.
As Western Europe witnessed the formation of new kingdoms, the Eastern Roman Empire remained intact and experienced an economic revival that lasted into the early 7th century. There were fewer invasions of the eastern section of the empire. Most occurred in the Balkans. Peace with the Sasanian Empire, Rome's traditional enemy, lasted most of the 5th century. The Eastern Empire was marked by closer relations between the political state and the Christian Church, with doctrinal matters assuming an importance in Eastern politics that they did not have in Western Europe. Legal developments included the codification of Roman law. The first effort, the Codex Theodosianus, was completed in 438. Under Emperor Justinian, who ruled from 527 to 565, another compilation took place, the Corpus Juris Civilis. Justinian also oversaw the construction of the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople and the reconquest of North Africa from the Vandals and Italy from the Ostrogoths under Belisarius. The conquest of Italy was not complete as a deadly outbreak of plague in 542 led to the rest of Justinian's reign concentrating on defensive measures rather than further conquests. At the emperor's death, the Byzantines had control of most of Italy, North Africa, and a small foothold in southern Spain. Historians have criticized Justinian's reconquests for overextending his realm and setting the stage for the early Muslim conquests. But many of the difficulties faced by Justinian's successors were due not just to overtaxation to pay for his wars, but to the essentially civilian nature of the empire, which made raising troops difficult. In the Eastern Empire, the Slavs' slow infiltration of the Balkans added further difficulty for Justinian's successors. It began gradually, but by the late 540s, Slavic tribes were in Thrace and Illyrium and had defeated an imperial army near Adrianople in 551. In the 560s, the Avars began to expand from their base on the north bank of the Danube. By the end of the 6th century, they were the dominant power in Central Europe and routinely able to force the Eastern emperors to pay tribute. They remained a strong power until 796. An additional problem to face the empire came as a result of the involvement of Emperor Maurus, who ruled from 582 to 602, in Persian politics when he intervened in a succession dispute. This led to a period of peace, but when Maurus was overthrown, the Persians invaded, and during the reign of Emperor Heraclius, who ruled from 610 to 641, controlled large chunks of the empire, including Egypt, Syria, and Anatolia, until Heraclius's successful counterattack. In 628, the empire secured a peace treaty and recovered its lost territories.
Western society. In Western Europe, some older Roman elite families died out, while others became more involved with ecclesiastical than secular affairs. Values attached to Latin scholarship and education mostly disappeared, and while literacy remained important, it became a practical skill rather than a sign of elite status. In the 4th century, Jerome, d. 420, dreamed that God rebuked him for spending more time reading Cicero than the Bible. By the 6th century, Gregory of Tours, d. 594, had a similar dream, but instead of being chastised for reading Cicero, he was chastised for learning shorthand. By the late 6th century, the principal means of religious instruction in the church had become music and art, rather than the book. Most intellectual efforts went towards imitating classical scholarship, but some original works were created, along with now lost oral compositions. The writings of Sidonius Apollinaris, d. 489, Cassiodorus, d. c. 585, and Boethius, d. c. 525, were typical of the age. Changes also occurred among laypeople as aristocratic culture focused on great feasts held in halls rather than on literary pursuits. Clothing for the elites was richly embellished with jewels and gold. Lords and kings supported the entourages of fighters who formed the backbone of the military forces. Family ties within the elites were important, as were the virtues of loyalty, courage, and honor. These ties led to the prevalence of feuds in aristocratic society, including those related by Gregory of Tours in Merovingian Gaul. Most feuds seem to have ended quickly with the payment of some compensation. Women took part in aristocratic society mainly in their roles as wives and mothers of men, with the role of mother of a ruler being especially prominent in Merovingian Gaul. In Anglo-Saxon society, the lack of many child rulers meant a lesser role for women as queen mothers, but this was compensated for by the increased role played by abbesses of monasteries. Only in Italy does it appear that women were always considered under the protection and control of a male relative. Peasant society is much less documented than the nobility. Most of the surviving information available to historians comes from archaeology. Few detailed written records documenting peasant life remain from before the 9th century. Most of the descriptions of the lower classes come from either law codes or writers from the upper classes. Landholding patterns in the West were not uniform. Some areas had greatly fragmented landholding patterns, but in other areas, large contiguous blocks of land were the norm. These differences allowed for a wide variety of peasant societies, some dominated by aristocratic landholders and others having great autonomy. Land settlement also varied greatly. Some peasants lived in large settlements that numbered as many as 700 inhabitants. Others lived in small groups of a few families and lived on isolated farms spread over the countryside. There were also areas where the pattern was a mix of two or more systems. Unlike in the late Roman period, there was no sharp break between the legal status of the free peasant and the aristocrat, and a free peasant's family could rise into the aristocracy over several generations through military service to a powerful lord.
Roman city life and culture changed greatly in the early Middle Ages. Although Italian cities remained inhabited, they contracted significantly in size. For instance, Rome shrank from hundreds of thousands to around 30,000 by the end of the 6th century. Roman temples were converted to Christian churches, and city walls remained in use. In Northern Europe, cities also shrank, while civic monuments and other public buildings were raided for building materials. The establishment of new kingdoms often meant some growth for the towns chosen as capitals. Religious beliefs in the Eastern Roman Empire and Iran were in flux during the late 6th and early 7th centuries. Judaism was an active proselytizing faith, and at least one Arab political leader converted to it. In addition, Jewish theologians wrote polemics defending their religion against Christian and Islamic influences. Christianity had active missions competing with the Persians' Zoroastrianism in seeking converts, especially among residents of the Arabian Peninsula. All these strands came together with the emergence of Islam in Arabia during the lifetime of Muhammad, d. 632. After his death, Islamic forces conquered much of the Eastern Roman Empire and Persia, starting with Syria in 634 to 635, continuing with Persia between 637 and 642, reaching Egypt in 640 to 641, North Africa in the later 7th century, and the Iberian Peninsula in 711. By 714, Islamic forces controlled much of the peninsula in a region they called Al-Andalus. The Islamic conquests reached their peak in the mid-8th century. The defeat of Muslim forces at the Battle of Tours led to the reconquest of southern France by the Franks, but the main reason for the halt of Islamic growth in Europe was the overthrow of the Umayyad Caliphate and its replacement by the Abbasid Caliphate. The Abbasids moved their capital to Baghdad and were more concerned with the Middle East than Europe, losing control of sections of the Muslim lands. Umayyad descendants took over the Iberian Peninsula, the Aghlabids controlled North Africa, and the Tulunids became rulers of Egypt. By the middle of the 8th century, new trading patterns were emerging in the Mediterranean. Trade between the Franks and the Arabs replaced the old Roman economy. Franks traded timber, furs, swords, and enslaved people in return for silks and other fabrics, spices, and precious metals from the Arabs.
Trade and economy. The migrations and invasions of the 4th and 5th centuries disrupted trade networks around the Mediterranean. African goods stopped being imported into Europe, first disappearing from the interior and by the 7th century found only in a few cities such as Rome or Naples. By the end of the 7th century, under the impact of the Muslim conquests, African products were no longer found in Western Europe. Replacing goods from long-range trade with local products was a trend throughout the old Roman lands in the early Middle Ages. This was especially marked in the lands that did not lie on the Mediterranean, such as northern Gaul or Britain. Non-local goods appearing in the archaeological record are usually luxury goods. In Northern Europe, not only were the trade networks local, but the goods carried were simple, with little pottery or other complex products. Around the Mediterranean, pottery remained prevalent and appears to be traded over medium-range networks, not just produced locally. The various Germanic states in the West all had coinages that imitated existing Roman and Byzantine forms. Gold continued to be minted until the end of the 7th century in 693–94, when it was replaced by silver in the Merovingian kingdom. The basic Frankish silver coin was the denarius or denier, while the Anglo-Saxon version was called a penny. From these areas, the denarius or penny spread throughout Europe from 700 to 1000. Copper or bronze coins were not struck, nor were gold, except in southern Europe. No silver coins denominated in multiple units were minted. Church and monasticism. Christianity was a major unifying factor between Eastern and Western Europe before the Arab conquests, but the conquest of North Africa sundered maritime connections between those areas. Increasingly, the Byzantine Church differed in language, practices, and liturgy from the Western Church. The Eastern Church used Greek instead of Western Latin. Theological and political differences emerged, and by the early and middle 8th century, issues such as iconoclasm, clerical marriage, and state control of the church had widened to the extent that the cultural and religious differences were more significant than the similarities. A formal break, known as the East-West Schism, came in 1054 when the papacy and the Patriarchy of Constantinople clashed over papal supremacy and excommunicated each other, which led to the division of Christianity into two churches. The Western branch became the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern branch the Eastern Orthodox Church. The ecclesiastical structure of the Roman Empire survived the movements and invasions in the West mostly intact. Still, the papacy was little regarded, and few of the Western bishops looked to the Bishop of Rome for religious or political leadership. Many of the popes before 750 were more concerned with Byzantine affairs and Eastern theological controversies. The register, or archived copies of the letters of Pope Gregory the Great, Pope 590–604, survived. Of those 850 letters, most were concerned with affairs in Italy or Constantinople. The only part of Western Europe where the papacy had influence was Britain, where Gregory had sent the Gregorian mission in 597 to convert the Anglo-Saxons to Christianity. Irish missionaries were most active in Western Europe between the 5th and the 7th centuries, going first to England and Scotland and then on to the continent. Under such monks as Columba, died 597, and Columbanus, died 615, they founded monasteries, taught in Latin and Greek, and authored secular and religious works.